Good evening. I've got 6:01, so I think we can go ahead and get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for December the 7th, 2021. If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Yes, council members Judith Chandler.
Present.
Julie Wolf. We checked him. Present, okay. Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Brimner.
Here.
John Shada appears to be not here. Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune.
Present.
And Mayor John Graham.
Present, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The first item, Mr. Shada, let the record show that Mr. Shada joined us at 6:03. Great, thank you. Okay, all right. Okay, so the first order of business is approval of the agenda, and I would, before I ask for a motion on that, I will mention, I know some council people have seen it. I did send out an email this afternoon recommending that we postpone the presentation on mobility and parking. We anticipate that that'll take approximately 2 hours just on its own with the discussion and all the detail. So I think that could be moved to next week without any problem. It's not seeking any formal action. It's essentially there to educate us and help us understand the parking and mobility situation going forward. So, and next week, just the other items only amount to about an hour's worth of work, so we could have a modest meeting, more modest meeting tonight and a reasonable one next week. So with that, I will seek a motion for approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda with the amended removal of item G1, the mobility and parking presentation.
Do we have a second by Councilor Wolf? Great, thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. Great, thank you. Any nays? Steve, you voted in favor. Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, so unanimous. Thank you. And I believe Mr. Cheney is okay with that. So thanks for being flexible, Roy.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Oh, well, I think just to be clear, we will move that to next week, the work session on December the 14th. So just to be clear, thank you. All right, next item is public comment on non-agenda items. This is a time when anyone in this public can speak regarding an item that is not on the agenda. I know we have at least one speaker tonight. We ask that you speak for no more than 3 minutes. When you come up to the microphone, please give us your name and address. And we typically do not respond to comments at this time. But so I think Mr. Andy Nicholas. Sir, if you'd come forward. Yes, if you'd sit there and you're going to, the button there in the center at the front, you press that and you'll see it'll turn green. It'll be green up around the microphone.
Great.
You need to get probably about 3 inches or so, pretty close to the microphone. So if you'd start off with your name and address, please.
Great. My name is Andy Nicholas, and I live at 121 Ruxton, the Twin Springs building. I actually called this afternoon because the residents and we have two residential units in the building, 2 commercial units in the building, and we just had a conversation about some things that we would like to address with the city. And I called this afternoon to say, would it be easier to email some folks, and who should I email, or is this something where you would come to a council meeting and make a request? And they said, well, funny enough, council meeting's at 6 o'clock tonight. And I thought, what a rare instance where I could actually get my issue across more conveniently by coming to a council meeting than sending an email. So it's kind of fun for me to be here, actually. Our issue really is just that there isn't a trash receptacle in front of our building. We noticed that there is one at each of the other Springs locations, but there isn't one very near our building, and we find a lot of empty cups, find a lot of trash around because a lot of visitors come to the Twin Spring, which frankly is the most delicious spring, and you can fight me on that if you want. But it's a popular location, and all of us love that the visitors come. It's just that it'd be really nice if the city would consider putting in a trash receptacle for us. The closest one I found was in front of the trading post down at 20 Ruxton, which is really not even in view of the building, so it's quite far away. So anyway, something to consider. The other thing is the 2 parking spaces in front of our building, I believe, are designated as commercial during the day and residential at night. But a very loud group of Texans who visited in the summer didn't like how the wording of that was when they got their ticket for parking in a residential area. And parking did the right thing and removed the sign because it wasn't written very well. But they didn't put up a new one. So what happened is all the residents got 2 new full-time day parking spots. And our commercial tenants, who are great, kind of lost 2 spots because the signage isn't there anymore. So it'd be great if we could just find a way to write a new sign and post that sign out front so that those 2 spots can be daytime commercial and evening time residential again. And those are the only things that the residents at 121 wanted to talk about today. I hope I didn't go over 3 minutes.
No, you finished at 2 minutes, 15 seconds, so you should get a star or something like that.
Well, I want to do 15 seconds then just to appreciate Councilor Johnson. So you're my ward. I only discovered in November because you were on our ballot, and my partner and I said, I wonder who she is. And it was delightful to find out that you're the director of the MAC, which I love. I think it's so great we have that here. And I just got my sewing certification, and it's all free because I'm also a member of the library. I just love the whole place, and I love you're a counselor. I love what you do. So there's my extra 15 seconds.
Okay, great, thank
Thank
you
you.
much. Yeah, all righty. Very good. Do we have anyone else who wants to speak on a non-agenda item? Looks like we don't. Okay, let's go ahead and push on then. Next, we have the consent calendar. It has 7 items on it for tonight. We have appointment of Justin Wilson from an alternate member to a regular member of the City Planning Commission. Appointment of Gloria Latimer from an alternate member to a regular member of the Planning Commission. Reappointment of Joy Porter as a regular member of the Transportation and Parking Board. Reappointment of Bob Bodor as a regular member of the Transportation and Parking Board. Approval of the November 16 and November regular minutes and the November 30 special meeting minutes. And then 7th is an amendment to the employee handbook. We've had all these things to review in our packet. So I would entertain a motion to approve and accept, or if anyone has concerns about something, we can take something off. See a motion? So let's see. Julie?
I move to accept the consent calendar.
Okay.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Onward. So we have 3 hearings tonight. The first, item H1, second reading and public hearing of ordinance number 1521, an ordinance adopting the annual budget and appropriating funds for fiscal year 2022 and amending the annual budget for fiscal year 2021. And we have our Finance Director, Becca Davis, to present. Becca?
Good evening. Per the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, City Council must approve the budget before December 15th. The first reading was passed on November 16th, and nothing has changed from the first reading. The forecasted ending unassigned general fund balance is $4,028,554 for 2022. And thank you for your attention to this matter.
Thank you very much. With that, does council have any questions, concerns, comments? We've spent a lot of time in this. I think we've had an opportunity to give it a pretty thorough scrub. Entertain a motion then? Mayor Pro Tem?
I move to approve ordinance number 1521, an ordinance adopting the annual budget and appropriating funds for the fiscal year 2022 and amending the annual budget for fiscal year 2021 on second reading.
Do we have a second? Okay, we've seconded by Councilor Johnson. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Great, thank you. Next item, second reading and public hearing of ordinance number 1621, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, extending its temporary moratorium on the acceptance of applications for vacation rentals to October 31, 2022. Denise?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction. This is, you had this last time. It's the second reading for this, just to extend the moratorium. Michelle Anthony is the one who caught this, so she needs the recognition for that. But we'll just ask you to please consider extending the moratorium.
Okay, thank you. And this is second reading. We will have we entertain public comment. And do we have any comments from City Council at this point? Julie?
Just to put it on the record that the reason for the postponement is because we are in the process of rewriting the planning code, and upon the planning code being rewritten, then we anticipate the moratorium would be lifted, just to have that on the record.
Good point, thank you.
Mayor, may I just
Yes.
point out that all of these items under hearings are public hearings, and the last item that we just approved, we did not hold the public hearing.
Ooh, my bad. Well, good
Amber
catch,
gets
Judy.
that credit.
Okay.
Amber.
Well, I guess in that sense, we're probably invalid. Let me ask this. Going back to item H1, the budget, is there anyone here that wants to speak to it? I will open the hearing then. Any interest? Gather not, so we'll close it. I'll look to the city attorney for direction. Do we need to take the vote again? Great, thank you. And Judy, do you have a thought on that?
It works for me.
Okay,
So
great,
our attorney's
thanks.
the expert.
Well, I appreciate the forgiveness here. Thank you all. Okay. You know, and I should have too, my bad. Okay, well, in an effort to do things a little more appropriately, I'll open a public hearing for the moratorium on the vacation rentals. Anyone want to speak to that? Judy, have we had any interest in getting emails? Guess not. Okay, I'll close it. And with that, council, any further discussion? Guess not. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move ordinance. We move to approve ordinance number 1621 on second reading and after public hearing, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, extending its temporary moratorium on the acceptance of applications for vacation rentals to October 31st, 2022.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Chandler. In a second, Mayor Pro Tem. We have several there. Okay, accepted by, let's show Mayor Pro Tem. Okay, any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Motion passes unanimously. Great, thank you. And the third item, it's a second reading and public hearing of ordinance number 1721, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, enacting a new chapter 3.53 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code, establishing a mobility and parking enterprise. And Becca, you going to walk us through this?
Good evening again. At the November 16th, 2021 City Council meeting, Council approved ordinance number 1721, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs enacting a new chapter 3.53 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code, establishing a mobility and parking enterprise at first reading. Tonight is the second reading and hearing for this ordinance. There has been one change since first reading: the addition of the words public transportation. And this is under section 3.53.020 under allowable use of funds. Other than that, this will set up a special enterprise fund to join our other enterprise funds. And this means parking and mobility will be supported by fees and not taxes. And this money can only be spent on this particular issue. And is there any questions?
Do we have questions for Becca? Councilor Wolf?
does it say public? Oh, it does say public transportation. I'm sorry, I missed where you put that in. No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, great. In that case, this is a public hearing. We can go ahead and go conduct that, and we may have questions for follow-on questions, Becca. So let me declare the public comment portion open. Anyone who wants to speak to this is welcome to do so at this time. Do you have any interest? If not, I'll close it. And back to council. Council, do we have any further questions or comments? If not, I think we'd be ready for a motion. Mayor Pro Tem?
I move to approve ordinance number 1721, an ordinance of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, enacting a new chapter 3.53 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code, establishing a mobility and parking enterprise on second reading.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Councilor Bremner. Any further discussion? Not, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The motion passes 6-1. Thank you. Councilor Wolf was dissenting. Okay. Section I, business item 1. It's the appointment of Shannon Solomon as an alternate member of the City Planning Commission. Mr. Solomon?
I'm Shannon Solomon, 600 Crystal Hills Boulevard, and
Just
Shannon Solomon, 600 Crystal Hills Boulevard. I am applying to be an alternate on Planning Commission, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Council, any questions for Mr. Solomon? I guess not.
Man, you guys are easy.
Guess we're in a position to entertain a motion at this point.
I'll move that we appoint Shannon Solomon as an alternate member of the Planning Commission.
And Councilor Wolf, do you second? Okay, so we have motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Shannon. We
Thank
appreciate
Thank
your
you,
service.
Shannon.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
okay. All right, next. Consideration of Resolution 2121, a resolution establishing a general tax levy for the purpose of raising revenue to the general operating fund and voter-approved mill levies for other funds of the City of Manitou Springs. And since this is a financial matter, we're going to hear from Becca again.
Yes. So City Council is required to approve tax mill levies for the general fund and the other other voter-approved mill levies prior to December 15th. This mill levy will be 12.999 and will raise in the general fund $862,345 from a mill levy of 10.594 plus the refund abatement mill levy of 0.049, which will raise an additional $3,988. In the open space fund, we have a mill levy of 0.8, which is going to bring in $65,119. In the capital improvements fund, it's 0.556, and that should bring in $45,258. And finally, in the El Paso Becker's Fund, there's one mill, which will bring in $81,399. The total property tax will be $1,058,109. And this is the highest mill I've seen since I've been here. Are there any questions?
Do we have questions for Becca? Apparently not. It's going to be a quick item, I suppose. I guess we're ready for a motion then. Mayor Pro Tem?
I move to approve Resolution 2121, a resolution establishing a general tax levy for the purpose of raising revenue for the general operating fund and the voter-approved mill levies for the other funds of the City of Manitou Springs.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Chandler. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Great. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Congratulations to everybody. We got the state satisfied. We made the deadline. Excellent. Okay, next item is the employee compensation and classification completed study. This is something that City Council talked about on a retreat back in June, and it became a fairly high priority item. So council wanted to get this done by the end of the year. So Kelly, you'll be presenting.
Well, actually, I will not be presenting tonight. Mr. Bob Longmire, who is from the public sector personnel consultants that we hired, he's going to do the presentation for you. And so if you welcome Bob, I'll turn it over to him.
Perfect, thank you.
Great, thank you.
I think we're getting the presentation pulled up. I can't see it from here. I feel like I might be getting old and having bad eyesight. I'm sorry about that. Let's see. So, I'm sorry, this was actually what we had used to inform the employees of the study. There was another presentation on that flash drive that was the results of the study. Yep. So that's maybe a good introduction to the study. You know, we asked all the employees to fill out questionnaires so we could hear directly from them what it is that the employees do. Just kind of a good point of note in which way which direction the information flows. You know, we wanted to make sure that we weren't coming into the city telling you how to run your city. We were hearing from the employees kind of directly what it is that they do so that we could do the classification and compensation study. But yes, kind of with that in mind, I thought maybe I'd run through the presentation, kind of the high-level results, and then leave time for any questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, just definitely let me know. I think it might be helpful to have a conversation so I can answer any questions that you have as we go through this. But ultimately, at the highest level, kind of just to start, you know, I thought we'd maybe go through a little bit about who we are, what the study is, maybe a little bit about what the study isn't, some of the big questions we're trying to answer, and then the results of the study, as well as some questions and answers as we go through the meeting. My name is Bob Longmire with Public Sector Personnel Consultants. You know, as the name suggests, all we really do is personnel consulting for the public sector. This is kind of it. We're really a one-trick pony, and this is all that we do. We get the chance to do maybe 30 or 40 studies like this a year, travel all around the country, meet with different organizations, different cities, different states. We do a lot of work here in Colorado. It was nice, you know, just sitting there. We spent a lot of time in council chambers and meetings, and, you know, it was nice and refreshing to hear positive public comments and feedbacks and things like that. And I think the comments here kind of echo a lot of the feeling we've had working with the city. Just been really positive conversations, really helpful employees, just very positive and overall really good experience working with the city of Manitou. I think you have a lot of really good employees and just been a really good environment to do the study in. So for what that's worth, I think that there was listening to the residents provide the feedback reminded me of that. Ultimately, our scope of work was to do a classification and compensation study. I think kind of the easiest way to talk about a classification and compensation study is to say we are trying to answer 3 questions for every job at the city. We are trying to say, does the job title make sense? Does the job description accurately reflect what the employee does? And then third, and you know, usually what people tend to focus the most about is what's the going market rate? If the employee doesn't sell the house, they don't pull the kids out of school, they commute in a different direction, what is the going market rate for this work? And that's what we've been tasked with answering. So we'll walk through a little bit about what that is. But that was what was included in the RFP that council approved in August. And we're back here to present the results. Ultimately, if we can answer those 3 questions, if we can respond to those factors, the reason you do these studies is to recruit and retain quality staff. That's the overall point. That's the mission. That's the goal behind the study. So if we have correct job titles and accurate job descriptions, then when we go to post a job, a qualified candidate can see that. They can see what we need, what work you have, the work that's performed, and then they can respond based on an accurate understanding of what the position is and what your need is. You know, if we can have competitive wages, it allows us to recruit the right employees, and also competitive wages allow us to retain the right employees. It makes sure that we're not undercompensating or overcompensating employees based on the going market rate, right? And I'm sure you're kind of aware of a lot of the overall market factors that are at play right now. You know, if we would have come to us a year ago and said, hey, can you look into your crystal ball and foresee what the market is going to look like and what kind of environment is it going to be? I don't think anyone would have expected for this many market forces to be at play. It is a very unique time. And everywhere we go, and all of the employers and all of the cities that we meet with, everybody's having a difficult time recruiting and retaining employees. You know, the pull from the private sector, the pull from other organizations, kind of the pressure on the lower end of that salary schedule is very intense. So just a lot of different market factors going on. So hopefully we want to put some data, some numbers, some science behind those numbers rather than just kind of some of those market feelings that are out there. So maybe to start with the classification side of things, a little bit about what that study is. Classification is the first two questions. You know, does the job title make sense? And does the job description accurately reflect what the employee does? So a lot of what we see here and a lot of what we're going to see as the results are just titling protocols. Things that we think of as like housekeeping. You know, do we have consistency when we say technician, specialist, analyst, coordinator, 1, 2, 3, senior lead? You know, are we using all of those terms consistently across the city? A lot of what we were seeing was different departments would call things different, difference based on kind of their individual departments and a little bit of their silos. You know, so a lot of what you see is we put in place trying kind of titling protocols so that we have consistency when we use the term specialist or analyst or coordinator. You know, we also want to make sure that there were some positions that are, if we have a position that's vacant, it's unused, nobody's doing that work anymore, and we don't need to do that work anymore, it's something that doesn't exist at the city, well, maybe we can remove that from the salary schedule. Maybe there's also a couple different just normal positions that exist at out in the market that don't exist here at the city. Well, we can go ahead and create them, write job descriptions for them. They can live on the salary schedule. Then when you need to fill them, they're there, and you can go out and you can recruit for those positions. So that's a lot of what classification is. As I alluded to earlier, the way we do that is we hear directly from the employees. So we were in this room earlier meeting with all of the employees, handing out questionnaires, getting an opportunity for all of the employees to fill out a questionnaire and tell us directly what it is that they do. You know, we don't want to guess at this. We don't want to assume, oh, I know what a utilities clerk does, or what a maintenance worker does, or what a parks maintenance worker does. You know, we want to make sure that the employees have the opportunity to kind of speak up and tell us what they do. We also want to make sure we have a second set of eyes on the information we're getting. So the supervisors reviewed what the employees said and provided us their comments. They couldn't change anything the employees wrote. They'd provide their comments, their input, their understanding of the position, so that we could really go through and answer that question. Does the job title make sense? And does the job description accurately reflect what the employees are doing? And the employees could work on them as part of a group. You know, we didn't want to make it a test or a writing assignment or anything like that. We just wanted to hear what it is that the employees were doing. So kind of high level from this. Oh, sorry, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Councilor Chandler?
I'm not sure if you want questions during or after, but I do have a question on this slide. You stated that every employee had the opportunity to complete a questionnaire, leading me to believe that it wasn't mandatory, that it was voluntary. What percentage of employees completed the questionnaire?
Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was north of 75%. And from our travels and our experience, that's pretty good participation.
Okay, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75% of respondents?
Yes. And so one of the other things too is that there's instances where like we have jobs that have multiple incumbents, multiple employees, and you know, you'd have 5 or 6 employees with the same job title and we'd hear from 2 of them. So we have a pretty accurate idea of what that position entails because the other ones are just, you're kind of interchangeable, you know, for lack of a better concept in some of those groups where we have multiple incumbents. So we didn't feel like we were missing any information in that process. Yeah, good question, thank you. So as part of this, I would say a lot of this was a relatively light pass, kind of normal housekeeping and pretty common in what we see in our travels. There were a couple positions here that we had that we could actually merge together. So we had positions that were doing similar things they had similar functions and we could actually merge those together. There was maybe 30 some odd titles, maybe 37, 40 titles, somewhere in that ballpark, where we just updated the title. Specialist to coordinator, technician. There were some instances where we wanted to say maybe a parks maintenance worker or utilities maintenance worker. Just be a little more clear about what it is that this job entails, a little bit more clear about what the functions and tasks and duties are of this. So just kind of high level, this is a lot of what I would refer to as just kind of housekeeping. My feeling and overall general impression was, your house was in order. There wasn't anything that we found structurally inept or broken or out of alignment. We didn't have massive misclassifications or having to move people around and do a lot of reclasses. So a lot of this here was cosmetic and, in my travels, a little bit of a light pass here on the classification side of things.
What is PAQ?
Oh, I'm sorry. PAQ is the Position Analysis Questionnaire. It's the form that we handed out that we asked all of the employees to fill out. Yeah, sorry about that. Fair Labor Standards Act. So FLSA is going to be exempt versus non-exempt. Do we have to pay the employee overtime? So we wanted to make sure we looked at that too. Kind of the good way to think about that is from a Fair Labor Standard Act, kind of the easiest way to think about it is, do you shower before work or after work? If you're getting dirty, if you're out working and doing manual labor, we want to make sure you get overtime.
And what does FLSA stand for exactly? Do you know?
Yes, the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Oh.
Yep. And I think it was of 1928, if I'm remembering right. It's old, and it's a mess. Yeah, it's everybody's least favorite thing. Okay. All right, so maybe I'll jump into the salary survey side of things. So classification, we look through, we say, hey, do we understand what it is that the employees are doing? Do we have an accurate job title that covers the work that they're performing? And then to be able to say, okay, what's the going market rate? We want to try to look at different comparators out in the market, and we're going to go through that here in a minute. So we have all of the comparators and what we looked at and some of the factors at play here. But in general, at the highest level, we want to make sure that we have similar organizations. Now, we need to make sure that we have similar organizations, and at the end of the day, we're more interested that the job is the same than that the organization is the same. So if you have let's just say a mechanic or somebody like that, because it's kind of an easy job to think about, they could be one of 2 here, one of 20 somewhere else, and it doesn't necessarily fundamentally change the nature of the job. As long as they're not working on different a more advanced or more complex machinery, that job's relatively portable around different organizations. And then so we say, hey, what's the market going rate? And I think one of the interesting things here and one of the important things to think about is the market going rate answers the question, where are we? That's a relatively straightforward and factual question. Where are we? The question I think that at hand and maybe a little bit more for council and the policy is, where do we want to be? How do we want to respond to that? Sometimes we'll work with councils who say, hey, we want to be the employer of choice. We want to have competitive, aggressive recruitment and compensation policies, and we want to lead the market. We want to be 5 or 10% ahead of market, right? Sometimes we have organizations that are like, we want to be at market. We don't want to pay above, we don't want to pay below, we want to be at market. Sometimes we work with organizations who say, we want to be a little bit behind market. We can't afford to pay what everybody else does. We want to be a little bit behind. And we know that that kind of might make it difficult for us to recruit and retain and some of those factors. So a little bit of how we respond to the market can be guided by some of those philosophical, where do we want to be points. Yes, ma'am.
What is your market? Is it Colorado? Is
Yeah.
it the United States? Is it the whole world?
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. So up here is the list of the factors that we kind of looked through of the different cities and counties that we had looked through for the study. We wanted to stay local, right? So, and local is maybe a little bit of a broad term. Some of these were, in Colorado, 100 to 150 miles away. So some of them were a little bit more what I would call regional comparators. Other organizations that have similar cost of living, similar services, similar factors, similar populations out there in the market. We want to kind of answer the question from what does it look like here locally? You know, where we recruit from, some of maybe those jobs that we recruit from locally. How do we look at regionally? How do we stack up our population, our services, our cost of living? You know, cost of living is always a really difficult conversation and difficult factor. So I always want to make sure that I look at it and that we include it and that we have it as a factor here for evaluation on whether we should include somebody in the study or exclude somebody. But we don't have a factor for cost of living. Like, we don't have a factor that says, okay, Pueblo, Colorado has a lower cost of living than us, so I'm going to take all of their wages and inflate them by a factor. We just try to treat the wages like what they are, the salary ranges. We want to be very consistent, very above board, very just kind of clean, and to say, hey, what is the rate that they are advertising for the job? And then we'll call that market. And then from there, we can start to talk about how does the fact that we have one of the highest cost of living in our local market, how does that impact how we want to relate to market? So kind of back to that statement of saying, do we want to be at market? Do we want to be ahead of market? Cost of living can help inform some of that conversation.
Can I ask you how you figured that cost of living? Okay, what's the basis for that?
So the cost of living is based on the Sperling's Cost of Living Index, which comes from the regional component from the Department of Labor. So the Department of Labor has a regional breakdown of cost of living factors, and then Sperling's takes it and goes down to the city and county level. It looks at factors like housing, food, gas, all of the standard factors. One of the things that is included in this, like I had mentioned, is housing. And that's sometimes a controversial factor in conversation around cost of living. There's conversations around, you know, can we afford to pay people enough to live in our geographic footprint? Pitkin County, you know, Aspen was one of our clients. That was a very relevant conversation. You know, it's very difficult to pay people enough to live in that footprint. So they have buses that bring people to work in the morning. So housing can be a little bit of a controversial thing to include in the cost of living, but it's based on the Department of Labor's geographic index and put together by Sperling's and their research institute. Yes, ma'am.
Did your analysis include the city administrator? And my motive for asking you that is that we had a previous presentation on that particular role of using different municipalities as the litmus. So was that also included?
It was, yes, and it just worked out. So today, Kelly let me know that might come up. So I have a detailed slide at the end that we can walk through and look at that specific example in a little bit more detail to kind of pull on that thread specifically. But yes, we did look at that one. Mm-hmm.
I guess going back to that cost of living, I look at nearby communities, Cascade, Chipeta Park, they have 109%, Green Mountain Falls 105, Colorado Springs is 108, and we're sandwiched in between them. I realize we have some high housing costs, but it seems to me like 153% is pretty exotic. Close by, you'd be looking at Perry Park and Larkspur, and those are expensive places to own property. But it seems to me, I'm a little suspicious of that 153%. It just seems very difficult to swallow relative to some of the neighboring communities.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask you about that, John? Can I ask?
Sure, go ahead.
I just, do you think it's too high even taking into account the rent? Because since Colorado Springs is such a huge city, and there are parts of it where the rent is much lower, of course, than living here. So to me, it seemed like a reasonable number because our rent is so high. Is that?
You know, that's true, and I can see that that's a factor. I guess, to me, seeing the formula, how it's calculated would be a factor, because you know, in that case, I'd probably look at the 153 and say, well, people are actually living in Colorado Springs, which is true. And I mean, and we understand that, we know that a lot of our employees live in Colorado Springs when they would maybe prefer to live in Manitou, but it's a cost of housing situation. So, no, I get that, and I can, if we factor that in, then it kind of brings the picture together.
And to me, it seems reasonable to factor in, I don't know how it would be done mathematically, but to also factor in the fact that if we can't afford to pay people enough to live here, Colorado Springs isn't that far away, and then we're looking at 108 instead of 153, so that might inform our analysis as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And I think a lot of these conversations are why we don't adjust any of the market numbers by a factor based on cost of living. We've tried really hard over the last 10 years to try to find a way to normalize wages and cost of living. And anecdotally, wages tend not to keep up with cost of living. If they did, I'd go be a janitor in Maui, right? And I'd be able to afford my rent and my health insurance and save for retirement and, pay for kids' sports. But wages don't tend to keep up with cost of living. And I never want to misrepresent the market nuances. So what I find most helpful is to just have kind of a conversation about where do we think we fall into this market basket? Do we see ourselves as somebody who leads this, who's just right in the middle of this, who might be below this, and kind of to relate to market that way, rather than to have a strict formula that inflates or deflates one of the comparators' wages because of the cost of living factors. Because, it is a very difficult number to put forth and to calculate, because also people can commute. They can drive in and out of your organization, and in and out of your footprint.
Right, and they're buying their groceries at the same store as we are, and they're buying their gas, so all of that part's pretty much the same. I mean, the big differential is probably the housing, and I'd like to see how much weight that puts on it, how much leverage. So when I look at that 153, I'm saying, depending on how you weight things, it could be 120. I would expect it to be over 100%, but I don't know if 150, it stands out like a
sore thumb.
It does, like a sore thumb. And how much of a sore thumb is it? So having some background on that would be helpful.
Okay, I can look into that and see what the formula is for how they take the Department of Labor's and what are the weighting factors, because, that Department of Labor spreadsheet's a beast.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can provide that. Okay. So, so once we have comparators, once we have the market, once we have a little bit of a basket of who's in, who's out, who's maybe on the sidelines, who do we want to have included in the study, we can go out and request their job descriptions, their org charts, their pay plans, to be able to come up with a conversation about what is the market going rate. So from there, we then compare their salary ranges. So every job has not every job, almost every job has a salary range minimum and a salary range maximum. Now we can get into a little bit of a conversation on range widths, distances between minimums, distances between maximums, and some organizations have different philosophies on range widths. So one of the things that we do when we go and do a study is we find the easiest way to compare this is just right down the middle. Give me the market midpoint. Give me the midpoint of the organization versus your midpoint. How does our midpoint align with their midpoint, and what does that look like there out in the market? So you can see not every comparator has your job. So out of a big market basket, we start to look through this and go, oh, well, they have an accountant that reports right to the finance director. That's not the same thing, and this one has this. And so we end up with a little bit smaller of a picture for each job, because not every organization is structured the same. Not everybody has the same number of levels and the unique nature and breakdown. So there's a little bit of a review that we have to do to go through when we're reading their salary schedules and their job descriptions. And then we have your PAQs in one side, and we're kind of going through and to say, hey, what's the market going rate? So when we do this, to imagine an example like this for all of the jobs that we found market data for. And then we can go through and to say, all right, how do we stack up salary schedule to salary schedule? The high level here, kind of maybe the one sentence summary, an oversimplification of like 1 million hours of my life's work, might be to say that Manitou Springs, we're behind market. Our salary range midpoint is more than 5% behind the average midpoint of the market for about half of our jobs. So 56%, about half of our jobs are behind market on a salary schedule basis only. Now, the good news here is our payroll isn't as far behind market as our paper. So our people aren't as far behind market as our payroll is. I'll get into that in a minute. because sometimes it can be a little bit hard to separate job from person. If I'm just looking at the job and I'm just looking at the salary ranges, the mins, the maxes, the midpoints, how does that stack up? We're behind market for a little bit more than half of our jobs. Yes?
One thing I don't really understand is where do you get the minimum, the maximum, and the midpoint? Because, I mean, is that just the minimum that the city would be willing to pay, or?
Yeah.
And I guess another part of my difficulty with this, if you could elaborate, is if I'm looking at the midpoint of a particular job description, is that midpoint supposed to assume that the person has been working that job already 15 years?
Yes, great question.
Or is that just the mean or the average of everything that Department
Okay.
of Labor collects?
Right.
Or what are these categories?
Okay. Sorry, yes. So really, really good question. So every city, every public sector organization has a salary range for jobs. So here at the city of Manitou, you have established and published salary schedules. Those salary schedules say like, okay, range 1, 2, 3 starts at, your first range on any salary schedule probably starts at minimum wage. And then the maximum is usually between 30 and 50% higher than the minimum. And so every organization has one of those. Every organization has a salary schedule. No organizations have a blank sheet and they just pay people whatever they want. So it's a public document, and we go out and request it, and they provide those salary ranges and that information for us. The beauty behind this is it takes out the nuances that come from having an employee's actual salary in the mix. Because what happens is, let's say if we wanted to talk about like a mechanic again, or an accounting manager or anybody, what the city is actually paying the employee in that job might vary wildly. You might have employees who came from the private sector, they're looking to relocate, they have 8 years left on their career, they're walking in the door with 35 years of customized tax experience, and they're just a rock star. Well, you're going to pay them a lot more than somebody who just came out of college and they're just training and they're just getting in, and you're going to use minimum for that. Industry standards are midpoint is a competent employee with about 10 years of experience on the job. So if you're competent, if you can do the job, if we can hire you and you hit the ground running and you got about 10 years experience, we're going to bring you in at midpoint. Most organizations allow the hiring managers to make offers and extend offers to employees between minimum and midpoint without any kind of special sign-offs. That's just kind of industry practice. And to be able to say, hey, here's the range you can use to go and recruit the right person that you need. There's some, you got to be careful with that. But the market tends to say between minimum and midpoint. Anytime you go over midpoint in hiring or making an offer to somebody, it usually requires director, city administrator sign-off, special approval to go above midpoint for hiring.
So as a follow-up then, do I understand then, unless there's something unusual or exceptional, if we're looking at less than 10 years experience in a job description, in a job, then we're looking at not the average or not the mean or whatever you call it in your,
Well, you can be, the midpoint.
the midpoint.
Yeah.
So midpoint is 10 years.
Roughly, yes.
Generally.
Generally.
So if you have less than 10 years, we're looking at less than midpoint generally, and if we've got more than 10 years, we should be looking at the other column.
Oh, okay. So,
Is that what you're
so now
telling
you're
us?
talking about how do we then put people back into this exercise? Okay, we'll get to that in a minute, yes.
Oh, sorry.
So, because ideally what we want to have is, we want to have an understanding of what the job is, a good job description that reflects what the work is, and then know the market going rate for that work. Then we can start to look through our payroll file and say, okay, all right, I got my mechanic. My mechanic has X time in job here at the city. So based on that, where do I want to put them in the new range? So you kind of have to pull the person out of the job, do an evaluation based on the job, then we put employees back into it at a later point in the exercise that we'll get to. That was kind of my little statement around how we're more behind market on paper than we are on payroll. Our people aren't as bad off as this might make it seem, because we want to make sure we have competitive wages, and then we'll put people back into this exercise in a minute.
That's because we have people that are more than 10 years, so they're going to be on the higher salary range. Is that what
Yeah.
you're telling us?
Well, in some instances, 40% of your people have less than 1 year. We got a lot of new people here. And that's defined as time in job. They might have worked at the city longer. They might have been a maintenance worker 1. Now they're a maintenance worker 2. You know, so there's some other factors here. And we can talk about how, a little bit like the cost of living conversation, we can talk about how we would weight those factors. Because we could maybe say, you know, I'm always a little bit sensitive to any system that would incentivize an employee to quit and rehire and make more money. You know, we don't want to tell the employees, hey, if you had 10 years, we bring you in at Midpoint, but because you work here, you know, now we're going to get a hometown discount on you and, you know, only pay you minimum or something like that. So we can talk about maybe how to weight some of those factors to move employees through their ranges too. Because, yeah, we have that here in a minute. But the idea here is, at least from a market standpoint, we want to know what's the going rate, how do we align salary schedule to salary schedule.
Question,
sir.
if you could go back to that
Yeah,
previous
sorry.
slide. Okay. In that box, you have like number of positions, that middle column. When you say positions, are you talking about like a specific job title?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, that
versus
should-
like an employee, an individual employee?
Yeah, no, that should say number of classifications.
Okay, so classifications, that was, okay.
Yeah, no, sorry
thought.
about that.
Okay, so now, so then the column on the right then would be percentages in terms of classifications.
Yes.
But that is a little, it's a little unclear then, because we might have several people in a single classification who are affected
Yes.
or not affected. So when we see 56 there, we're talking about 56 job titles, not
Yes.
necessarily 56% of the
Of the
city's-
workforce.
The workforce, yeah. So
Correct.
I guess, you know, one of the questions I would have is, if we've got 4 people and we move everybody up, that's probably a good thing. In some respects, there's some cost there. So
Yeah.
I want to see how does that balance out?
Okay. Yeah, and so we'll have kind of the numbers of employees and what that looks like for here at the end.
Okay.
But yes. So, and one of the things too it's a really helpful reminder is not everybody sees something as a result of this study. You have employees that are fine. They're set. Their jobs are appropriately compensated. They're moved through their ranges okay, and we don't need to address those people. So there's gonna be people who, as a result of this study, don't see any increase, and that's totally normal. That's very common. So, and this is about what we tend to see in some of the studies. You're better off. Kind of honestly, you're better off than a lot of the organizations we see. It's not uncommon for us to see this closer to 75, 80% of the jobs that we serve.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would help me if if those 3 in that first column there, more than 5% behind market. How many actual employees is that? I think we
okay.
have about 78 employees. Is that half the employees? Is it a third? And how many at market? And how many
Okay.
are above? So
Yeah.
those kinds of numbers would be useful.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, and we can, when we start to have the conversation about how do we put employees back into this structure, then we can start to look at how many employees need to move. Because that would be a really helpful number for you as well then. That
Yes,
would be,
yes, it would be.
okay, got it, yes, sir.
Is a position another word for job title?
Yeah, I misused that, I'm sorry. I spend a lot more of my time in the numbers than writing things down. So I tend to like the data better, but yeah, so technically speaking, a better definition of that would be number of classifications surveyed, percentages of classification in that grouping.
Who was the number 1? What was above? I'm just so curious.
Oh,
What was
I think it was a custodian.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And I think that one was the private sector was dragging that one down. Okay, sorry. The only other item of note on this page here was kind of from the benefit standpoint, the contributions towards employee plus family health care premiums. Your split of 75% of the employee's premium is right there within range of the market. Kind of the easiest way to understand the market is pretty much every organization is picking up between 75 and 80% of the employee's contribution to employee plus family medical premiums. So well within market ranges there. The way I kind of looked at when we started to dive into the benefits and to look through all of those details, there was nothing inside of the benefit package that was offered here that was outside of market norms that made me think that we could be a little bit below market on the wages that we offer because our benefits are so good. We didn't see anything like that made it look like our benefits are so rich, are so above market, that we want to be a little bit behind market on salary. So I think our benefits are just kind of right there across the board.
I'm sorry, did you say that most employers pick up 80% of the cost of a family health insurance plan?
Kind of the public sector organizations, most are picking up between 75% and 80%.
And does that refer specifically to health insurance, or is that the vision and dental also? Is that the whole thing?
That is health.
Health only?
Yes.
And that's not the public sector, that's just,
That is the public sector.
that is,
yes.
so that excludes municipalities?
That includes municipalities.
The public sector includes municipalities?
Yes. Yeah, the private sector would be the Starbuckses of the world.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's exclusively municipalities, it's government?
For that statement, yes. Yes.
Okay, so most government entities pick up 75 to 80% of the family health insurance plan?
Yes. Yep,
Thank
that's how to put that into a sentence that makes sense. That maybe should have been my bullet point there. Okay. So one of the things that this graph here is kind of representing and looking at is a little bit of an understanding to see how do we relate here on our, as we move higher up the food chain, as we tend to move higher up the organization here at Manitou Springs, how does our salary range midpoint align to the market? The general statement here is, the general way to look at this is, the higher up here within the city you go, the more behind market you tend to be. It's a loose correlation. We still have a lot of jobs here that are low on the salary schedule that are behind market. We got a lot of jobs here in our supervisory ranges that are behind market. We got to get these jobs up to market. We got to get these jobs caught up. We got a couple jobs here that we can address. The nice thing about these jobs is these tended to fall into some of your more, some of your director level jobs, which the employees are already far enough through their current ranges that we can shift those ranges without absorbing substantial costs. So it means that if, let's say, this job here is 20% behind market, it means I can move that range 20% and I don't have to give the employee 20%. Okay, we can look at some examples here if we wanted to, but if we remember, so we have a market
Can I ask,
range.
are you saying you're going to give them a different job title so then it works?
No.
Oh.
No, what we're saying is, so if you remember, we have our ranges, our salary range minimum, our salary range maximum, our midpoint. What we currently have on paper, our midpoint, is behind market. So we need to take that job and move it into a new salary schedule. So here, you can kind of see an example of the salary schedule we designed, where we start to have some choices here for our salaries at the city. Like we talked about earlier, every organization has a salary range that starts at minimum and then works its way up to the maximum. So now we can have a conversation about, hey, what range should we put a job in? Based on the market midpoint of that job, where should we put this job? So for example, maybe one of those jobs should fall into a range 20. In a range 20, we can offer the employee at minimum, $88,000 all the way up to $130,000. So we have a nice wide range in the salary schedule for what we can offer individual employees. So as you start to see, if we move a job that was somewhere maybe at a midpoint of 90, if we move that job, and let's say the employee was making 90, and we move that job into a range 118, where the midpoint's 100, you can see the 90,000 that they were making is still well above minimum. It's almost to midpoint. So now we can do a calculation to put where should that employee be within that current range. So we can talk about that in a minute. But the general idea here is that we have two different factors that we're trying to balance. We're trying to balance what is the market going rate at midpoint. Then, what are our employees making in relationship to that? My statement is the higher paid employees here tend to be further through their ranges, so it costs less money to fix those. The vast majority of the spending, the dollars that need to get spent to implement the study, are being spent on employees who are lower in the salary ranges, the employees who are making less. Even though we're a little bit further behind market on paper at the higher end, the dollars need to go to the people who are making less on the salary schedule. The most of the money needs to be spent down the salary schedule, where employees who are in those more working class entry level type jobs. That's where the vast majority of the money ends up. So part of this, so once we know the market going rate, once we have an established market going rate, we need to have a framework. We need to have a ladder. We need to have a place to put those jobs. So right now, you currently have a salary schedule. You currently have choices between where do we put jobs. Your current salary schedule, the distance between minimum and maximums, actually very narrow. It was narrower than almost any other organization out in the market. So we designed an industry standard, perfectly acceptable, very boring, kind of in my opinion, like salary schedule. The distance between minimum and maximum, the range width is 50% wide. The difference between step 100, or range 100, range 101, range 102, range 103, range 104, as you go down the salary schedule, they increase by 5%. So the difference between a job in the range 100 and a job in a range 101 is a 5% difference at minimum. This gives us a lot of choices to strategically respond to market. So now when we start to go out and say, okay, the market going rate for this job is $68,000. We can come to our salary schedule and to say, okay, I have the range 110, and that's $67,768. Okay, well, I could put it in range 110, or I could put this job in range 111, and that midpoint is $71,000. Well, that's probably a better fit to go into range 110. So we go through and we assign all of your jobs into ranges based on what is the range nearest to the market midpoint. Again, very kind of standard practice. Now, here's where, as council, you could give us direction to say, let's lead the market. Let's go ahead. In that example where if the market going rate is 68,000, don't put it in a range 110, put it in a range 111. Lead the market a little bit. Let's round up when we're placing jobs onto the salary schedule. Those kind of thoughts, some of those philosophical statements, that's how they get translated into what range a job goes into. So if there's a statement that says, we want to be X amount ahead of market, what we would do is then go through and say, okay, market's 68, range I have nearest to that would be, range 111. That's what that exercise looks like a little bit. Yes?
So is the idea that the whole purpose in putting them in a different, line 11 instead of line 10 is so that when you advertise the job, you'll have theoretically more people interested because they realize you're paying more than usual? Is that?
Or that we're paying market rate. So the market rate, when they would go out and they would look for, what is the going rate for a utility maintenance worker? And if they were to go and look at jobs from these other organizations, they would say, oh, this other organization starts at 59,000, or 56,000. Where do they start? Oh, 56,000. Because a lot of the jobs and a lot of the employees we're trying to recruit, they don't fully understand the value of the benefits yet. They don't fully understand the value of a pension and the retirement system and all of those things. A lot of times people are just looking to make the truck payment. They're just looking to put food on the table. They're really just interested in what's the rate you're willing to offer for this work. A good salary schedule where we place jobs onto that salary schedule based on market allows us to advertise a competitive minimum for that job, and it gives you the ability to say, oh, somebody has a lot of experience, maybe we can bring them in a little bit higher in this range based on their experience. Yep. Okay, this seeing eye exam here Wow. That was small font. Sorry about that. What this looks like here is kind of what we've explained before. This is the exercise that we went through for every job at the city. You can start to see how this becomes very laborious. And just kind of, we start to walk through here on the right-hand side, we have your current ranges. So this is your current salary range. What's the salary range minimum, midpoint, maximum? You know, your old range, what is that? Is that an LT3 here? Okay, so yeah, your old range, you used to call it an LT3. We're saying we have a range nearest to that is a 109, I think that says. And so we say, okay, if I were to only look at your existing salary schedule and to put you onto the new salary schedule based on market, well, maybe we want it in a range 109. Well, what does the market say? So now we look at the market midpoint, and now we put the job onto the new salary schedule based on a couple factors. Based on what's the going market rate at midpoint. I also want to make sure I don't have internal compression. I also want to make sure I have enough separation between my maintenance worker, my senior maintenance worker, my lead maintenance worker, my supervisor, my superintendent. I want to make sure we have enough separation between those jobs so that we incentivize people to take on additional responsibility, to move to different job titles, to go and get those certifications, put in that work, get that certification, move up, move into a range that has a higher going rate. So it becomes a little bit of a balance between where you are now, where do we want to be, and how do we move people through that. One of the things that comes from this now is, now we get to put people back in the exercise. So once we have the market rate, once we know, hey, this job should be on a range 110, or whatever example it is for that individual job, first thing we need to do is we need to look at, do any of your employees in that job fall below minimum of the new range? At a very, very basic, we got to at least make sure people are making the minimum of the new ranges. So when we went through that exercise, when we went through all this process, and we actually looked at your payroll file, we found out that there are employees who are now falling below minimum of our new recommended ranges. So as kind of an implementation step, as something to do as the result of the salary study, we want to make sure that employees are at least making minimum of their new ranges. In order to do that, that costs about 1.5% of payroll. There's about $70,000 in salary increases that need to go to certain employees to get caught up and get to minimum. And John, to your question earlier, this is where it might be helpful if I gave you all of here's the number of employees affected, here's the average increases. I have that data.
Yeah, that would be, and then also to see what the aggregate cost to the city would be as well.
Yeah, kind of the total cost.
In a spreadsheet, that wouldn't be hard to do, but that would be a useful data point.
Okay. Yeah, I have all of that data. It's about $70,000 before benefit load. So, there's benefit, there's a couple extra amounts on there that the finance manager would know what that delta is.
Yeah, Julie, go ahead.
If I'm asking you something that you've already answered 10 times, just tell me and I'll stop, okay? But I'm still perplexed about, is it just some random thing that we choose? I don't understand the nearest range to market maximum. Where did those numbers come from? Is it just some random thing from the previous slide that we're just supposed to choose? Oh, let's pay utilities superintendent. I mean, that part of the chart makes no sense to me. I don't.
No, and that's a very good question. To answer your question, no, it is as far away from random as we can possibly get. It's based on the market data and the factors that we have. So it's based on what's the going market rate for this individual job. We tried to present this in an aggregate format so that we try to say, once we go through that exercise for all of the employees and we do that work, the costs associated with doing that are this number. And that's what we're talking about here is this is now high level rolled up. But no, when we start to go through, when we went through that exercise and put all of those jobs onto a range based on market, it's based on that data that we have. So we're not just guessing that.
Can I just jump in? Mm-hmm. So if I look at some chart and there's going to be line 115 and it says utility superintendent next to it, is that why? Why do we have 115 next to utility superintendent versus 109 next to senior water plant operator. What are those numbers? You said, well, the numbers are what seems minimum, average, and maximum.
So
and
market
the-
midpoint.
And the municipalities that were on that slide. But
Yes.
what's with these numbers then? Are those just random numbers that you invented, or are they supposed to mean something to us, or what is
No.
109 versus 106?
So 109 and 106 were from the previous slide here about our new salary schedule. So our new salary schedule has numbers. Instead of your old salary schedule that's like an LT2 or LT3, we have a numerical designation for the salary ranges. And now we put jobs onto those ranges based on market.
So those are just random ranges with the 5% increase under each line, with each subsequent line.
They're a numerical
It just-
identifier.
And then so those are just numbers, and then you plug the job into the numbers.
Yes, yes. So we have those salary schedule, and it's not important to get hung up on the 100, 101, 102. That's a unique identifier for the range. A range 100 starts at $33,260, and the range 100 maxes out at $49,920. So the range 100 is how we assign jobs onto that range. We invented this chart. Yes, yes, yes. And then so there's a couple different ways to create these salary schedules. There's a couple different factors, and we built those factors based on the market data and generally best practiced industry standards.
This is unique to Manitou.
Yes,
Did this
so yes.
specifically based on all the research
Yep.
and the
So
data
yeah, you go
collection.
look at Colorado Springs' salary schedule. It's not going to have a range 100 that matches this. You go to any other comparator, everybody has their own, and then everybody has multiple, because general employees are in one thing, police and fire are in another. There's a lot of different salary schedules. So yes, this is unique to you. This is created to respond to the market study.
I have a question.
Yep, great question.
Judith?
So are most municipalities starting at $16 as a minimum wage, beginning wage for this schematic that you have put together? So in other words, level 100, is that a $16 an hour wage job that you start and then you add 5%
Yes.
on top of that?
Yeah, and the way that we built that was based on obviously just the minimum wage legislation, a lot of what's going on in the private sector, and a lot of the wages that are being offered there. And then looking at how many jobs do you currently have that are below that number, and there's not very many. So we drew a line there. And again, council, if we want to have a conversation, you can always give us directive. We want to start at 15 an hour, or 15.50, or 16, or 17 an hour. We can adjust that based on any kind of policy statements or any kind of factors that exist.
I see, thank you.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. So the first part of implementation is to make sure that employees are at least at minimum of their new ranges. From there, now we start to want to look at how do we move employees through those new ranges. So we don't want to have everybody just sitting on minimum. Pretend we have that example of somebody who's sitting on minimum and they have 10 years experience. And you go to hire somebody new who's brand new. They just have a heartbeat. They have no experience. Well, if my person with 10 years is sitting on minimum and now I hire somebody new, it makes that person who has 10 years feel pretty crummy about it.
Julie, could you speak into your microphone, please?
Sitting on minimum, I'm not familiar with that term. Can
Okay.
you tell me what you're talking about?
So that would be an example of where we're looking at our salary schedule and the minimum of that range. So for example, if we looked at a range, 100, that would be minimum wage. If we looked at a range 110, for example, that would be 54,210. So it's minimum of that job's range, because every job has a minimum and a maximum associated with it. And every job, well, not every job, a lot of jobs are going to have different minimums. The minimum of a utility maintenance worker 1 is going to be different than the minimum of a utility maintenance worker 2, which is going to be different than the supervisor. So those minimums are going to be different. But we want to make sure that employees are making the minimum of their individual range. From that point, once we get to there, an option that I think is a really, really good idea and we strongly recommend is to move people through that new range based on their time and job. Let's give them some credit for their experience. Let's give them credit for their knowledge and their time with the city, and let's move them through their new range. So part of that exercise looks like another round about $70,000 in spending, about 68, or another roughly 1.5% of payroll. So to do both of those things, to implement the study, we're looking at about, again, loosely 3% of payroll, and again, about, that dollar amounts to move through the salary schedule.
Mayor Pro Tem, to give a question.
Thank you. Why wouldn't we use certifications in education in addition to time and?
Yeah, we certainly can. We certainly can if the feedback is to be more aggressive, if the feedback is to be to offer a richer, more aggressive incentive to the employees, we definitely can. A lot of times we look at the education and these certifications as meeting, if you meet the minimum of the job, kind of like table stakes, like if you just meet the minimum, then you're in the job and good from there. But we could certainly look at something that says, if you have a college degree in a job that only requires a high school education, maybe we move you a little bit further through that range. Or if you have a certain certification that's of value in your job, then we could maybe move you a little bit faster. We can always look at some factors to kind of add on to and go above and beyond this level.
Councilor Wolf?
Thank you. Yeah, because Nancy, I don't know if this is what you were thinking about, because, you want to look at improved skill set and licensing and that kind of thing, but if we're talking about some of the job positions where there may not be any licensing, but you still don't want the person who got hired last month to get the same pay as the person who's been with us for 27 years, cleaning the same toilet.
Yeah, I'm not talking about, I was just asking, I think time in the job is the key one and certainly the simplest. It takes out that complexity. But in the past, we have looked at certifications and education, so I was just wondering why you didn't choose to include that, that's all. When we did a huge decompression about 3 or 4 years ago, analysis and move people around in the pay schedule. So I was just wondering, that's all.
We didn't have any good reason one way or another. I can certainly go and model that. Okay. And then so the final thought here on our kind of the implementation is, when we're looking at these factors and we're talking about this study, this is different than what you currently have budgeted. This is different than what's currently in there for the 3.5% merit increases based on performance in 2021. So I just wanted to make sure we made the note that, keep that in place. Ideally, we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. We don't want to take from the merit money to do this. We don't want to have to shift anything around. So that's why this is in addition to, separate, other than what you currently have budgeted and set forth to do those merit increases. I guess maybe some final thoughts here. Just in general, I think a couple of the thoughts that we've been having here is you can give us some feedback and give us some direction to say, hey, go out and be more aggressive in response to market. If this pass that we did here looks too lean or not competitive enough, we can always go and, implement this and go and do more and kind of be above and beyond where we're at. So we can kind of tailor things to match budget needs, constraints, concerns, those kind of things. We think this pass is a pretty good balance at going after the market. I think this one is, if you put us in a room by ourselves and tell us, hey, in your best practices, what would you do? This is kind of what we came up with, to say, hey, let's move people to minimum, then let's move them through their new ranges based on those factors. So that's why we presented it here today. But we can always be more aggressive, less aggressive, those kind of feedback. Salary schedule, my last final note would be, I'm really encouraged to see that you do have those merit increases. Always make sure that we're moving people through those ranges, that we don't just leave it stagnant, that we're doing increases, that we're moving people, we're moving our ranges, we're keeping pace with market. A lot of what we're seeing right now, the advice I'll give you is anytime I will talk myself out of as much work as humanly possible. You don't need us to come back next year. You can call around and ask the group and ask the market, how much are you moving your ranges and how much are you moving your people? And then you can keep pace with that movement, and that allows you to be generally within market and to keep pace with that for a good number of years. And then, 5, 8 years down the line, you can pop your head up, do another study, and you'll be in a pretty good and competitive spot. So that's my best advice for ongoing maintenance of this, is to kind of go through it that way. Okay?
Thank you. Counselor Chandler?
So, on the slide that is headed implementation options, where you're talking about the approximately 1.5% or $70,000, and that's strictly payroll, right? So what I would want to see is the bigger picture. I would like to know what the cost to the city would be once we add in those additional benefits. I think for me,
okay.
I would need to know the big picture before we say, well, this is the real cost of what we need to look before I would be comfortable with, with working with the ranges that you present.
Can I say something real quick? With that, I can tell you that we typically go anywhere between 35 and 40% as the primary estimate for benefit costs. So you could do a 35 to 40%, add that on there. Now, typically it comes out lower than that. Not all of our employees take the biggest packages. They don't all insure their families. They don't all take all of the benefits. But we like to go with on the higher end and then come down lower. So you could use that. So we're right around close to 200,000 if we're talking about this for the whole package to get it changed.
So point of clarification. So what I hear you saying is, in order to implement this recommendation based on this consultant, is we would be looking at $200,000 for salaries plus benefits to move into these ranges that are recommended.
Yes, that includes the benefits.
Thank
Can
you.
I say something really quick, like?
Yeah, let's see. Becca, you have the floor.
Yeah, the payroll benefits for the non-sworn people, the non-public safety, is about 15.22%. That includes the para contribution, unemployment, and Medicare. When we use that higher number, that's when we're including health insurance. So the payroll-related ones, really, it's, I believe, 15.22%.
And that would also be helpful because these employees are already employed here. And so they probably aren't going to change their health care contributions and plans and things like that.
So does that mean that you're still on the 200,000 number? Or based on what Becca just said, should we reconsider that number?
Well, Becca's number, of course, like she said, only includes the payroll component of that, which is, she said, like almost 16%. You have to figure in their benefits, so we're going to add a little bit more in to get up to at least 35%. And it could be 40. It just depends on what people choose for their benefits.
So I'm not real clear on a range of what this will cost. I've heard 200,000, then I heard, well, it depends, which I realize, can you give us a range then, just so that we can track what you're trying to tell us?
Yeah, Julie, I think Denise has a comment. Let's hear that, then maybe that may answer your question, Julie. Denise?
So I just did the quick math. It's about 162,000, because Becca's right, all the ones that are here already have the benefits. So that's already part of it. So you're looking at somewhere about 162, 165, something like that. That's real close.
Thank you. Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, please.
You probably said this already, but this package or this proposal would put us at market, not leading the market and not lagging the market, but at market.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
so
you.
this
So
package,
our philosophical decision at our level is really to give direction, basically answer that question where we want to be.
Okay, all right, thank you. Other questions, comments? Okay, Mayor Pro Tem, please.
Just in terms, if we can start actually discussing this, philosophically, I think because we are going to have an increase in our budget in the next year at least, a significant reserve in our budget that we haven't had for a long time, we're going to need a really strong and stable workforce to be good stewards of our dollars and to implement all the many projects that we're going to want to implement. So in that regard, I don't want to be behind market because I want to maintain the good employees that we've got now who have been trained and are developing into a really good team. So just in terms of throwing that on the table for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Chandler, please.
So I agree. I mean, of course, we want our employees to feel like they are compensated adequately for the work that they do at market rate. I also wonder, and I'm sure this is beyond the scope of your consulting practice here, it really costs a lot of money to hire a new employee and train them, right? I mean, so I don't know if that's even factored into the mix, if we were to say, well, once you're paying market rate plus benefits, I would imagine that presumably the assumption would be you're much more likely to retain that employee and have them be a productive employee versus having the cost of hiring and training a new employee. So I don't know if you can throw out a figure of what that means based on our investment versus what it would cost us to continually have a revolving door where we're hiring and training new people.
Yeah, the figure that kind of gets tossed around in the industry is somewhere between 40 and 60% of the annual salary of the employee is what it costs to replace them. That's kind of the loosely accepted figure. By the time you figure the hours to go and post the job and recruit and meet and interview and then get them on board and do the paperwork and train them and then get them up to speed, and by the time they're actually contributing, because you're paying their salary while you're teaching them how to not hurt themselves. So there's a point which you got a lot of capital sunk in these people, and the generally talked about number is kind of 40 on the loose end, 60 on the high end of what the annual salary is. And then the retention rates, again, anecdotally, we do hear from a lot of people that their retention increases because the whole point of the study is to recruit and retain people. And so when you go out and you send a message as council to say, hey, as part of the market study, we want to make sure you are appropriately compensated. Stick with us. You want to be here. You are valued. We want to recruit and retain employees. And as such, here is your adjustment. It does really benefits for retention.
Well, but I'm going to go on record as saying I think that's a pretty good investment to get our employees up to market value based on your study. Thank you.
Council, I'm wondering if it makes sense for us just to go around the table and see how we feel about this. Councilor Chandler kind of given us an idea of where she's at, or we can discuss this, ask questions. It's kind of council's pleasure. Okay, well, then maybe we'll just take a kind of quick temperature reading, go around, and then maybe we'll have a second round of questions.
I have a
Okay,
question
Julie. Yeah,
before
go
we
ahead.
answer your question.
Okay.
Assuming there's consensus to move forward with some increases here, does that require us to redo the budget or no big deal? How does that leave us?
It would be a mid-year budget amendment, or if you do it before that. So let's say you do a budget amendment in February after you do your thing, we would just add that to the budget amendment.
So we have flexibility, in other words, to say when we would want this to begin. It doesn't necessarily have to wait until June 1st.
Right. Right, if you say, if you vote, if you make a motion in second and say you want this implemented, right, that means that you want that part of the budget, and we would just add it to the budget amendment then. You've given approval for us to move forward.
But it doesn't need like first and second reading, all that stuff?
No, we can implement it as is, and then again, we'll just do it in that budget amendment. So when Becca brings it back to you, if that's February, if that's March, April, May, whatever that may be, then, because I think you may be making other changes, maybe not, we'll just add it to that at that time and make it part of the amendment.
Can I
Okay, thank
add
you.
a follow-on question? So then those changes would go into effect in February?
Let's say you want this to go into effect January 1. You would tell us when you want it to go into effect, and then we would make that, whenever you decide that you want this to be implemented, yes.
Thank you. Well, if we could maybe just go around the table, I'll start with Counselor Shada. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I believe we ought to at least do what the consultant suggested, which is to move the employees. I'm kind of, it's sort of an odd terminology to me in terms of move employees to their new range. It seems like to me it should be move employees to their proper place on the range. Okay? That's what I would call that center column, and that's what I would vote we do, and we would make it effective the first of the year.
Okay, thank you, John. Natalie?
I just wanted to clarify, so you are not suggesting we do the first column, just the second column?
No, the second column is the and of the first. So
Gotcha.
he's saying, I think
Correct.
tell me if I'm wrong.
You're correct.
The first column is if you just made everybody fit at least minimally in the new ranges. And then the second column is to actually get them positioned correctly within the range, given the criteria that you said, which was using time in job in terms of service. And so my vote would be that we implement column 1 and column 2, okay? And then there wasn't a cost of the third column.
It's currently, you are already doing that.
Okay,
So
thank you.
this was
Okay.
my kind of just like.
Thank you.
And as a note, you already have this budgeted, keep it there, don't touch
Okay,
that one.
thank you. Okay.
Okay, so John, you're from the Chinese menu, you're taking off a column 1 and column 2.
Well, the Chinese menu is, I would like to pick this slide, okay, all of it, effective January 1.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think that clarifies things.
Thank
Good, thank you. Natalie?
I would also like to select everything from this slide effective January 1.
Okay. Judith?
I concur.
Okay. Nancy?
Concur.
Julie?
I agree, but I am confused about something that might affect my answer if I couldn't be indulged for a moment. Where is it determined if your experience is related enough to count or not? For example, and more specifically, our city administrator, which I see is the very last line item on your chart. I don't know, we were asked to look at, a proper range for her, and so this is, my understanding, the first time she's been a city administrator. How does that, where does that leave us?
So what we're looking at is the simplest, easiest factor of how much time in this current job with this city only do you have. So we are not taking into account experience elsewhere. So we didn't go through everybody's resumes and read through, okay, well, before you came here, you were an engineer assistant, and now you're an engineer, and you had 4 years there. So we didn't factor in half time elsewhere. This is only looking at time with the city.
And so how do we know when you move from min to mid, time with the city? When does that magic moment happen?
Based on your position date, based on when you were hired, when you entered this job.
So
title.
if I entered my job today, when
Uh-huh.
do I move up to mid?
So if you entered this job today, we would want to see you over the next between maybe 7 to 10 years, get your way all the way to midpoint.
Oh, you told me. So mid
Yep.
means you've been
So-
here 10 years, not
Yep.
that you have 10 years
So
of
we're looking,
experience in the field.
exactly right.
Just
You got it.
here.
Yep, you got it. We're going to be able to change seats soon, right? So yeah, no, you got this, because you don't give it to everybody right away. So you want to, ideally, in a perfect world, we want to get the employees who are newer. You want to take people who are new, high-performing, talented employees. You want to increase them fast, kind of get the golden handcuffs on people, get them closer to minimum so that when they go and look out at the market, they go, oh, the rate you're advertising is the minimum of the ranges. That's well below what I'm making now. I don't want to leave. So we want to get people in the door. We want to move them through their ranges. And then you kind of honestly, after you hit midpoint, you start to slow down and taper until you get to the 75th percentile. Then we level them off. So the way we designed the formula to get super boring is you move faster at first, then we tier it off, then we flatten it, and then we put a cap to make sure I'm not giving somebody like $37,000 or something crazy. You put a cap on that adjustment for financial best practices and moderation.
Thank you. So Julie, how? Okay, so
Effective January. I
column-
agree with everybody else.
Okay, so okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank
Steve?
you.
Okay, so I'm the last one to vote. Okay, and sorry, Denise, you have a comment? Okay,
I
Denise,
just
then
want to make a
John.
comment that this is for the employees. You have to look at me separately. So this is for the employees only, not, even though I'm an employee, but then you'll look at me separately and decide what you want to do. So this vote right here is for the employees.
Great, thank you. John, you had a comment?
So is, back on your other slide where you had 100 to whatever it was, 120. Okay, so do you have a different curve formula that you were just painting out here in terms of going from start to midpoint to your flattening off? I mean, what's the shape of that curve? What's the formula?
Yeah.
Is that different for each one of those ranges?
No.
Or,
No, it's consistent between ranges. And then, so we want to aggressively move you to midpoint. So you move through the range 7% of the range width per year in job. Up until the point you reach midpoint, then we move you 2.5% through the range until you meet the 75th percentile. Then we level you off. So it kind of looks like this. It looks like taper, threshold. So it's a three-tiered movement based on time in the position.
so to understand the function there, the first 50% is 7%, right?
Yes.
Okay, you get to 50%, and then it's 2.5% until what, 75%?
Until you reach the 75th percentile, the start of the fourth quartile, yes.
Okay, and then what, and then that flattening off
Then
is what?
flat. So whether you have,
I see.
right, so if you have 30 years in the job or 65 years in the job, I'm not going to spend money to max you out. Because if I were to max you out in the new range, now you have no future growth
Yeah,
potential.
I understand.
And now you're mad at me.
I just, no, I was
Yeah.
just trying to understand what the
Yep.
function was.
That's,
Thank you.
that's the function,
Thank
is I
you.
don't want to spend money getting people to maximum just to make them mad
Okay,
at
I
me.
understand. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got a couple thoughts here that are maybe a little bit different, I think, than the rest of council. Yesterday, Kelly sent out a couple of spreadsheets that's, it's classification summary, position classification plan, and it's the table with the various job descriptions. In looking at that, I don't see anything for police officers or for fire department personnel. And they, together, I think those two groups have represented about probably around a third of our workforce. So is there a different thought to that, or what's the story?
Because they have such a different base that we'll be looking at, we decided to separate out the civilian and the sworn, and the fire and police will be done next year. Because the police just had one not too long ago, and that one's still in place and it's still good. So we are planning on doing one separately, only because the metrics are a little bit different for those type of positions.
Yeah, well, several years ago, Joe Breister did come up with a different pay scheme for the police officers, and that seemed to work reasonably well. I think it was this summer when Chief Otto was addressing us about police department progress and concerns and so forth. He seemed to, the impression I got was he felt that the salaries were in line, and that system seemed to be working. So I guess my thought was initially that this was addressing, when we said city employees, we meant all city employees. And now to find that this represents, about 2/3, I feel like the work's a little incomplete. I'm frankly a little bit disappointed. In general, I like what's going on. I think I would join the rest of council in large part in thinking that, column 1, column 2, and getting it done in January is probably a step forward. It looks to me like there's some mechanisms there where we can encourage people to stay with the city, to develop themselves, to build their skill sets, to take advantage of whatever training we offer, and I would like that mechanism there. I think about where we're looking at Manitou in the future. We have more resources than councils have previously had. I think we've got more problems. The next few years can be pretty dynamic, and we need a good workforce. I think we want a competent, loyal, invested group of people working for us. So I join the rest of council in that. I think that's a good step forward. I think it gives management some good options. Again, I'm not excited about the idea of coming back next year and addressing the police and fire separately. Maybe that's the only way around it. Okay, so basically, if there was a direction from council to adopt this, to take column 1, column 2, and make it go on January 1st, I would, in general, be supportive. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got some other. Okay, well, okay, I think we're getting close to a motion, yeah, so, okay, Nancy, and Julie, did you have something separate from a motion, or?
I just wondered, because unfortunately, I didn't notice that the police and the fire were off of this chart too. I can't believe I didn't notice that.
Right.
So are they still going to get the 3.5%? Or what's going to happen with the fire? I just want to know what's happening with the rest, an entire third of our employees that we thought
The
were
police is
included
in a
here.
STEP program that was approved by council, so that is a very different program, and it's the way the most police officers work. So they are on a STEP program. The fire is on the 3.5% merit. And when we agreed to do, or when you guys gave direction, I did state that the fire and police would not be part of this because the police is on a STEP program that was adopted about 2 years ago. We will reevaluate that this year in 2022, and it is a very different type of assessment at that point than what civilians are.
So does that mean some of the police will not be getting any cost of living increase until next year? or
I can't remember
whenever?
how the STEP, we can bring that back to you and show you exactly how the STEP program works. I don't remember all the details, and I don't want to give you inaccurate information, but it is a program that most police departments use, so we can bring that back to you and share that.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Shada?
I guess my motion would be that we implement this and that we also implement a 3.5% across the board pay increase also effective the first of the year, regardless of whether they're in these other STEP programs or whatever. We just, at least everybody gets that bump in terms of given as a cost of living.
Okay. Yeah, John, I guess if you're making that a motion, could you state that again a little, be very specific?
I move that we implement what the consultant is suggesting in terms of, on the final slide here, okay? And that in addition, covering essentially our paid fire and police employees that are on these other scales, that also effective the first of the year, that they're included in the 3.5% merit increase.
So that's a merit increase, so that's based on performance. Is that what you're asking, is that we keep it a 3.5% merit increase?
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're saying, so we have no cost of living increase,
We have no cost of living, we have a 3.5% merit increase is
which,
what we have
okay, so I want to
implemented.
go, is that, that's discretionary depending upon your supervisor in terms of whether you get that?
Right, it's a performance base, so then we'll go through, and if you meet certain standards, you get, the majority would probably get the 3.5, so if you are, meets expectations, so we would go from there. So that's your choice, but it is a merit increase right now.
I personally would prefer not to put that part in the.
No, I
directing
would like
that.
to make that a part of my motion, okay? And I actually would like that not to be a merit increase. I would like that to be a cost of living increase.
I have a question about that before we vote. Can we have some discussion time?
I think we'd have some discussion. Yeah, I think Nancy had a comment. And then
I was wondering if that then would mean that the people in their evaluations who met would get the 3.5 in addition to the 3.5 COLA.
That would be you guys, your discretion. Do you want a COLA and a merit, or do you just want the merit, or just the COLA? So that would be up to you.
We've done all the evaluations based on anticipating, correct?
That is the
Not we,
direction.
you have done,
yes.
you guys have done all the evaluations.
Well, the
based on that.
evaluations aren't done yet, right? They'll be done in January and February. But the direction that we were given previously is that you want merit increases with no COLA. If you want a COLA and a merit, or just a COLA, that we'll ask for your direction.
So would that, I'm just wondering in terms of how the directors and the supervisors have been evaluating their people for the past year, the expectation was if you met expectations, you would get a 3.5. So now if we give just a COLA across the board, that might be frustrating for people who worked very hard to get the 3.5, and then they could have been lazier. That sounds terrible, but they might not have had to work as hard to get the 3.5.
Do you mind if I speak, or do you want Judith to go?
no, Denise, you go ahead, and then
Okay.
then we'll go to come to
Yes,
Judith.
that is one of the things that can cause frustration if somebody's worked really hard, they've done exceptional work, they exceed expectations, and then they get a 3.5, and then somebody who else meets expectations or is below expectations still gets a 3.5. That can cause morale issues, but that's, yes, that can cause morale issues.
I guess I wanted to
John,
clarify.
just a minute. Judith is going to,
Yeah,
Judith will have the
Well, I
floor.
just want to point out one thing. There's a motion on the floor that hasn't gotten a second. So I'm assuming, I don't know if that gets us into discussion phase right now, but that said, I feel more comfortable not including the police and the fire now, because it's my understanding that that was not their expectation, and because they're on a different program that is on schedule for us to look at early next year, that really what we have on the table right now is this issue that I would like to specifically address and not include the police and fire at this time.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, as you pointed out, John
Well-
made a motion.
Well, I
and-
guess I would like to talk about essentially just what my proposal was to also add a cost of living increase in addition to the merit, okay? It wasn't a substitute, okay? I think that prices and things are galloping along here, and I think the city is in a good enough financial position that we can at least do a COLA adjustment in addition to all of those other machinations in terms of getting people to the right thing. In other words, after we get people on these ranges, okay, properly, my proposal is that we add then some kind of a COLA increase, okay, to cover this galloping kind of inflation that's kind of going on, okay? And in addition, leave the merit in there, okay? That was my
And
proposal.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, that excludes police and fire, John. You're just talking about the employees otherwise, is that right?
No, I would like the COLA to apply across the board to all our employees.
And is there a
Okay.
way that we might know a dollar amount on what that would be?
Yeah,
I
Please.
can share just what I've been seeing, and you may have more information than I do of what the COLAs have been that I've seen kind of across. I've seen about 2 to 3 is what I've seen on the manager's listserv, but you probably have more information than I do on the COLA this year.
Yeah, the temperature of the markets is difficult because a lot of what we're seeing is there are groups that are frozen into existing contracts and MOUs and aren't able to take advantage of all of the market changes that are happening and taking place right now. So when we take those groups out, if there's not a contractual obligation locked in, we are seeing in that 2 to 5% range. The biggest numbers out there are just absurd, and those are usually coupled with compensation studies. So usually they go out and they find out we're behind market, they'll do a compensation study, and then do things like that in addition to it. That's where a lot of those really big numbers are generated. But just kind of across the board in that 2 to 5% kind of is what we're seeing.
Well, we ought to be able to, I mean, somebody can get the budget book out and figure out, can't we really quick, what a 3% COLA would be? Somebody can, thank you. Can somebody look that up real quick? I can look up my book.
Yeah.
But as an example, I'd like to just know what like a 3% COLA would be for, all our paid employees, regardless of whether they're fire or police. I think the city of Manitou, this is my philosophy on this, year after year after year, it seems like this city is always behind. We're always playing catch up. And I would like to see us, at least 3% on a COLA thing, get ahead of the curve. And I know that's not much, okay?
John, if I might add, last week we had a basically pretty close to a day-long retreat, PPACG, and this topic came up. It looks like El Paso County is anticipating about a 2.5% COLA.
Okay.
I don't think it's fully locked down, but it's going to be pretty close to that. City of Colorado Springs, maybe 3 to 3.5%. Sounded like what those, what the.
Thank you for giving those
So-
ranges.
so-
So I
so-
think 3 would be within at least the ballpark.
That seems like a rational
Thank you.
amount, and I guess then, and kind of for my benefit, I guess I see this 3 ways. One is an alignment to bring people up to, to adjust to market. Then we have a second thing is the COLA, and then the third thing, merit. And in my mind, merit is something that should be under the jurisdiction of management, of the directors, to really reward good employees appropriately, and to maybe send a message to others that they need to pick up the pace a bit. So, I'm frankly, while Becca's looking that up, I have a little bit of difficulty with your motion because I see 3 separate things and they're all rolled into one. So,
I guess my motion is to adopt this slide and in addition, do a 3% COLA across the board in terms of after this adjustment is done, okay? In other words, obviously, they don't get the COLA on, well, it depends upon, I suppose, when you calculate this 3.5% merit in terms of when that happens, okay? And I don't know what somebody would have to inform me in terms of whether that happens at your annual evaluation cycle or when the heck that crazy thing happens. But it seems like at the first of the year, independent of when this 3.5% takes effect, I get that might be a moving target, okay? And maybe, Denise, you can speak to that 3.5 merit when that would attach in this slide.
Yeah, so what happens is we go through, and we have deadlines of when the employee does their self-evaluation, go forward. We try to have them done by the end of March, and then they're retro. They start January 1, so we retro them, but we try to have them completed and all employees evaluated by the end of March.
So I guess, thank you for that. So then I guess my proposal would be to implement this slide, okay, a first of the year COLA increase of 3% and preserving this 3.5% merit as how Ms. Howell had depicted it, okay? And then it feels like to me we're at least kind of getting our employees, I hate to say it, at least about 3 to 5% again above the midpoint, okay? which I don't think is just like a big, huge train wreck from our standpoint. And so many years we have gone by in this city, and people are way down the pile, and people have lived through this year after year after year after year. So that's my motion. Thank you.
Okay. Natalie, Natalie, I don't know, it sounded a little bit different to me, but are you on board?
I'll stay with the
You'll stay
second.
with the second. Okay, so we have a motion, a second. Okay, we're getting numbers here. In the meantime, we can have discussion. Yeah, actually, while the numbers getting caught up, perhaps it'd be a good idea to take a break. Nobody, let's say 10 after 8. Okay, let's go ahead and resume the meeting. John, did we get some numbers? Or I guess I should,
Yes,
Becca.
and Becca can keep me honest about the numbers. I believe the COLA increase that I'm proposing is 174. Is that not correct?
Correct. That
Thank
is
you.
correct. Now, that's assuming that, that includes fire and police at their current wages. And the civilians would be with the minimum range, through the range, and then taking that number and multiplying it by 3%.
Yes. Is that what that is?
That is what that
Thank you,
is.
thank you. I just want to verify. So that's the ramifications of my portion of the motion that has the 3% COLA. Correct there, Becca?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. And Nancy, that's your understanding as the seconder? Excuse me, Natalie, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
Okay. It's not just an itis old age. Sorry about that. Okay.
So the total ramifications to the proposal is the 170 plus 68, okay, plus 174.
It's 70 plus 68, so we just rounded up to 140.
Thank you. 140 plus 174, correct? Thank
But-
you.
I thought I heard $200,000 with benefits for just getting people in the mid-range.
And that excluded police and fire, right?
So
That was, oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. That was because we included the medical in there, and the medical's already been part of it. So we double dipped, basically, is what we did, so I apologize for that.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Okay, so,
So may I ask, so then where are we? What's it going to cost to do this screen? And then what's it going to cost to do the 3%? Can you give us those two numbers again, please?
So the total of my motion is 315,000.
okay.
316,000, correct? Or somebody quickly?
I had 314, John.
Yes, 314. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I just
Okay.
rounded up.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
But
314.
okay,
you.
so we have a motion second, so we're in discussion phase here. Kelly, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, is it 314? Okay, yes, sorry. I thought we were off a little bit, but thank you.
Question that 314, that does include benefits, or it does? It does include, okay, that was my understanding. Okay, council, questions, discussion? Okay. Right,
I
any,
guess in terms of discussion, I just want to put it out there. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I really like the proposal about the cost of living increase because, as we know, inflation is really flying high. And, it's hard enough for our employees to be living probably not in Manitou, but near here where it's expensive enough for housing. And then we're looking at significant increases in their co-pays for health insurance, significant increases in food prices. So I think now is a really good time for us to consider this, and I appreciate it.
okay, thank you. Other comments, discussions, okay. Well, we have a motion and a second, looks like we're talked out. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Okay, all opposed, say nay. I'll say nay. Thank you. Motion
Mr. Mayor?
passes.
I would also like us to, at our mid-course budget correction, when we see how the year has gone, I think we ought to revisit what this consultant has said about essentially where we have picked our midpoint to be. And as I understand, where we sit right now is that we are picking the midpoint as exactly on market. And I think we ought to have the discussion as to whether, if we're going to be an employer of choice, whether that midpoint at market meets that criteria. But to me, I think this was a pretty good lift to this point tonight. And so I guess I want to make I would like HR and Denise and whatnot to keep us honest in terms of my proposal that we revisit that at midpoint, at the mid-year, to decide are we happy with that the middle part of market, okay, there? Or do we think we want to be below that? Horror of horrors, I hope not, okay? And at least maybe consider whether we want to be 5% or 10% or whatever that is. Sir, each one of those ranges you said was a 5% bump? Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I just think we ought to revisit that, because if we're going to have this statement in our employee handbook and all this other kind of stuff that we want to be an employer of choice, then to me, I think we need to calibrate whether market, the middle, is where we want to be. I think we need to have that discussion. So that's my proposal for a mid-year discussion. Thank you.
Okay. John, thanks. I think that's a good point. And just to state the obvious, that the motion passed 6-1. I was a dissenting vote. I think in general, this is a good idea, and in large measure, I support it. But this is one of those things I kind of like to sleep on. It would have been my druthers to push this out and maybe flesh it out a little bit. I still have some questions. I have faith that staff will be able to make sense of all this and implement it appropriately. So rather than wait, I think it's a good idea to push forward. Okay, that said, Kelly, any follow-up?
Yeah, I did want to allow Bob to give the information on Denise, if you feel like that's a good time for the city administrator salary, so that you can make that determination as well.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense to go ahead and we'll get that information. Of course, we'll consider this an executive session, but.
Correct.
Excuse me. Sorry, okay. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, I had added to an appendix to the slide here of just, if we followed all the same rules. So in my spreadsheet, I treat everybody equally. I just say, what's the market going rate for the job? How do we align up? And then I click and drag that down on the payroll file. So walking through all those details, if we follow all of the same rules and go through that process, the city administrator's salary would move from 124 to 136. So following all of the same rules and all of the same methodology, that's the movement that we would see. So I can walk through how I got to that. If you would like me to go kind of step by step through the entire process, I can walk through that. But the market going midpoint, so the market midpoint is 161. So that is the midpoint for this job. That would put it into a range 128. So if you remember our salary schedule from before, all those choices, the choice I have nearest to a market midpoint of 161 is a range 128. The city administrator's current salary is below the minimum of range 128. So that first choice we have of saying, hey, we want to make sure employees are at least making minimum of the new range. The city administrator would need $6,381 to be brought to minimum of the new range. So that was kind of that column one from the previous slide. Column two from the previous slide is given the in-time adjustment based on the years in the job here with the city only, ignoring all previous experience. We would want the city administrator to be 14% through the new range. That's kind of a fancy way of saying, midpoint is 50% through your range, maximum is 100% of the range, minimum is 0. So we're basically just saying we don't want the city administrator on 0. We don't want them on minimum. If I'm following all of the same rules that we did before, we would want the city administrator moved 14% through the new range. Yes.
So 14, well, is this under the minimum, the mid, or the max column under your proposed range assignments? What
So
do you?
look at the minimum of range 128. So the minimum.
That number isn't on my page. Oh, 128, the range, okay.
So we would look at the minimum. So the first question we ask, the first test in that column 1 is to say, does the employee's current salary fall below minimum? In this example, the employee's current salary does fall below minimum
What
of
is the
new range.
current salary?
I believe it's 124,080. So 124,000, roughly.
Is that right? So 14% of the new range means 14% of what?
We would be 14% higher than the minimum of the new range.
I
So
don't
you-
know. I've lost track of what the hell the
It's
new
okay.
range is. I'm sorry.
No, and that's okay. So we would take the minimum of the new range, because I'm going to add one more complicating factor here for you, just to make life harder. Earlier, we had talked about we have a cap in place. So what we had done to control financial costs and control the in-range adjustments is we say we will move you to minimum of the new range, then we move you through the new range to get you towards midpoint. But there's a cap of $6,000.
Where's the new range, sir?
The new range is range 128 based on market. So that range 128.
Oh, look at the line. Okay. I'm just having trouble with your vocab. All right.
So the minimum of it, and so I didn't have, the minimum of range 128 is 130,000. So our employee is currently making 124. The minimum is 130. So that's where you see we need to spend about $6,000 to get to minimum of the new range. But if we treat everybody equally, if we do the same rules and we apply all the same rules, now we want to move the employee off of minimum. We want to give the employee credit for time and job and move them through the new range. Because, yes,
On your slide, you don't have 128, so what are
Oh.
the three numbers for 128?
yeah, my apologies for that. The minimum of range 128 is 130,462. The midpoint of range 128 is 163,077. The maximum is 195,693.
And these numbers, again, are based on the average municipality in Colorado, or no? It's only based on those cities that were on your first slide?
The cities that were on the first slide, correct.
That's
This is
all.
your market basket. So like the city of Denver they are not in this because they are not part of your individual market. Yes, good question. So now we get the employee, so this is the exercise, we get the employee to minimum of the new range. Once the employee is at minimum of the new range, we then move them to their proper spot in the range. And here's where we have a little bit of the flag that kicks up, is when we are moving the employee, they reach the cap of we don't spend more than $6,000 to move the employee through their new range. It's just an industry standard cap that you put in place that avoids somebody getting $35,000 or something crazy as a result of the study. This employee triggers that maximum amount, so they would get $6,381 to move to minimum and an additional $6,000 to move to the range. That takes the salary from 124 to 136,461. And that's following all the rules we followed before. Now, part of this that I do not have in this slide is then would the city administrator get the 3.5% COLA? That would then, if that rule applies, it would be in addition to this number. Yeah, the 3% COLA. So that's kind of how we walked through, followed the same rules for everybody, irregardless of any other factors.
If I could just make one comment, these numbers are considered already in what you've already voted through for all the staff. So these numbers are already in that pocket. So just so you have that, it's not in addition to what you've already approved.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? Okay,
Just
Nancy?
if we were to put the 3%, add the 3% COLA, and if we were to determine a 3.5% merit, how much would that bring it up to? I can't calculate that quickly.
3.5% would be $4,776.17.
So the 3.5, that would be the merit, and then for COLA, there'd be another 3%.
Right. Yeah, $146,014. Yeah, for that. And then I had 34 cents, but actually, I guess it'd be 10 cents less, because I just called that 136,462.
Well, keep in mind,
Came
we've
up.
considered the COLA on already at this salary and the merit. We've already figured that 3% and the 3.5% on the total number. Yeah, we did. Yeah, that's, all of this is already considered for this one
For this
specific.
particular thing,
Okay.
yeah. I get that we calculated the,
Yeah,
300 plus K.
Right.
Okay, so if we, 136,461 and 90 cents, if we add, 3.5% to that, gives us a total of 141,238 and 7 cents.
Dollar-wise, how much is the increase is that? Since you got your calculator out.
Yeah, so we said 124 currently, so,
Is that like a $20,000 raise?
it's $17,238,
Thank you.
basically.
So, Mayor, you threw out a figure of 146,014. Is that including the 3% plus the 3.5%?
That was counting the 3.5% twice, so, and as Kelly pointed out, so that 136,462, or 461.90 includes the COLA, I believe.
Got
It doesn't, okay.
No. The 136 that's up here, that's to bring to the minimum and then get to the next, where she should be, or where this position should be in the range for the 2 years. I was just trying to make the point that as an overall picture, we've already added in, with that number that you just approved, the 300,000, we've already added that 3% and 3.5%. So the numbers that you're kind of coming up with here are not in addition to what you've already voted on.
Okay, I see what you mean.
So
Okay,
what we
thank you.
voted on supposedly included a cost of living for the city administrator, but not anything else for the city administrator?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
Everything that we voted on, the first numbers, right? All the whole package, that slide, section 1, section 2, section 3, plus the 3%, that whole pot of right there included this position, the city administrator position.
It already included the city administrator as in what range? We've got all these numbers under,
At the
128.
136, 461. So that's,
at the 136,461?
So I think.
So you already bumped that up without telling us? No, I mean, but the 136, I don't see that on line 128.
It's,
So that was added in on what we already voted on.
It was included in those numbers. However, that's why we wanted to pull this one out, so that you could see that separation of where this would be. And it is up to you whether you want to approve this particular increase or not. So if it's not, then those numbers would be adjusted accordingly.
And if not, we'd have to re-vote on what we just voted on?
No.
no, I don't think so. I guess for my benefit, I'm thinking of this, of handling the city administrator's compensation as an entirely separate exercise. I think that's probably useful.
Right.
Okay, so if there's several parts to this, okay, so the adjustment takes us to 136, 461 and 90 cents. Okay, now, then the question is, do we want to add a 3.5% merit to that, because this already takes care of the cost of living concern. Okay. No, okay. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be dense. Judith, maybe you can explain it to me.
So I move that we bump the city administrator's salary to the 136,461.90 and add to that the 3% COLA and the 3.5% merit in addition to the base of 136,461.90.
Second.
Motion is second. Judith, so did you say one of those values was a 3% and the other was 3.5%?
Yeah, because the 136,461 just brings her into the range given her 2 years of experience. That's not in addition to the 3% COLA that we approve for everybody else, or the 3.5% merit. So my motion included the bringing her up to the 136,461.90, and in addition adding the 3% COLA plus an additional 3.5% merit increase for a total of
145,474.
yes. And but I did make that is a motion on the floor with a second.
And so I want to, can I also just?
Yeah, John, go ahead.
So our computations, Becca, of this total amount, which would be 21,394, is included in the computations that we speculated on earlier, which was 314. Yes, okay, thank you. So when we had anticipated, we used the entire sheet that was submitted, okay, and we speculated that essentially that there would be the COLA and the possible merit of 3.5%. Okay, so that was included in the 314 estimate of the total package. Okay, so all we're doing here is teasing out what would happen to the city administrator. Okay?
Okay.
All right?
Or can
So it's taking 124,080 as in, like Councilwoman Chandler said, moving her to the base point of 136,461, which is the low end, okay? And then moving her, moving her, 136,461 is moving her appropriately in the middle column, okay? Adding the 3% COLA, which is 140,555, and then a possible merit of 3.5%, which totals 145,474.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that's your motion, and let's see, and Natalie, you were the one who seconded? Okay. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-1. Thank you.
Mayor, were you the no vote? Who was the?
Excuse me?
Who was the?
Oh, Counselor Wolf voted
Okay,
negatively,
thank you.
voted against. Okay, Mr. Longmire, Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank
Becca,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to item 4 under business. First reading of ordinance number 1821, an ordinance increasing the city's special tax on the sale of retail marijuana and retail marijuana products. Becca, I guess you've got a full night tonight, young lady.
I know.
Okay.
I think this is a record for me. Okay, so first I'm going to give a little bit of a background. On November 5th, 2013, the voters of the city of Manitou Springs approved a special sales tax on the sale of retail marijuana. The ballot question included a range from 5% to 10% on that sales tax, giving city council the authority to increase or decrease the tax within that range, which was a very good idea. Recently, council provided direction to staff concerning increasing this sales tax. So, and that direction was, let's look at a 4% increase to the top of the range, 10%. So tonight, an ordinance is being brought before you for first reading to increase it by that 4% up to 10%. And if approved tonight and on second reading, which will be on January 4th, then this will go into effect on January 10th. So this is the matter before you at the moment.
Thank you. Guess I would ask Mr. Parker if you have any comments, sir? Okay, thank you. And Jeff, you owe us chocolate because you forgot to turn on your microphone.
I feel I should have something intelligent to say because it's been a pretty quiet lawyer meeting tonight, so I'm sorry I don't have anything complicated to add to this one.
Okay, thank you. Council, discussion? Any comments or questions for Becca or for Mr. Parker? Okay, hearing none, I guess I'd entertain a motion.
I move approval.
Do we have a second? We have a second by Councilor Wolf. Any further discussion? Okay, let's go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Becca, thank you very much. I guess I would like a little direction from council. As Becca said, the next regular council meeting is January the 4th. That's also the night that we'll be swearing in our new council member, and that'll be the last time we have Mr. Bremner with us. It would be a public hearing, and typically that night is brief and just housekeeping, and there's kind of a little party afterwards. We could certainly do the second reading then. If anybody has an interest in postponing it, that would be January the 18th. Just really a question of timing. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, Julie?
I think it won't take that much time, and I'd love to get moving on it. We could use the money.
Understood. Okay, if there's no objections, we'll just stick with January the 4th then. Okay, very good. Thank you. I appreciate the direction. Okay. That brings us to receive or act on council correspondence. Anybody have anything? Okay, Nancy, I think you were first up, so you quick draw.
Yeah, I just had a concern about the last week's bulletin that Counselor Wolf had submitted a correction. And as I was looking at the minutes, it seemed like the original article was more accurate than what was put in the correction. So I'm just wanted to know if we should, before we take something, a correction of the Pikes Peak Bulletin to them, that we as a council should agree to what that correction is, as opposed to one individual, because it looks like one individual, because it was listed as Counselor Wolf asked for a correction, but to me that most people are going to see that as the council. So that was just a concern.
Well, in
that I
that
had.
case, I'd like to propose that we send a correction to the bulletin indicating that there was perhaps just a typo, but Jack Elder indicated that we would be adding a new lane to Washington Street. That's impossible. We're going to add a new line. So there's one correction I'd like to propose. I wasn't going to bother telling the bulletin because I thought most people reading it are going to know that it's impossible to add a lane to that street, but since we need consensus, I would throw that out there.
And that is true, and I noticed that as well, and I've noticed lots of things in the bulletin that could be interpreted differently. So I don't want to get into a contest with the bulletin and how they report, but that particular thing concerned me, that one counselor member was making corrections. And to me, it would just be more accurate to ask our PIO to make those corrections after the minutes are approved. Thank you.
Right. And I believe we do have a public information policy, a set of rules as to how we're handling things in terms of publicity, public relations. I'm not sure exactly where this would fall. This is a little, I think, outside what was defined in that set of rules. I don't, Mayor Pro Tem, did you have a suggested correction to submit to the bulletin, or?
No, I don't want to, again, often it's a matter of interpretation. So I just thought it was premature for one counselor to go and make a correction, which ultimately I found to be quite inaccurate, more inaccurate than the original article was.
Okay. And I think with the set of rules we have in terms of, publicity and public information, we do identify Alex as sort of the point of, the point of contact. So I guess in the future, my thought would be if someone has a concern about an article in the bulletin or anywhere else, they would contact Alex first and maybe have him work the problem and kind of explain it. And he's sort of our intermediary on that. And I mean, he represents the city as a whole, I think, and would be, he's perceived as of course, being objective and not with any particular alignment to any given council person. So I guess going forward, my thought would be that if any of us have concerns, we would relay them first to Alex. Denise, please.
Mayor, may I please ask that you send them to me, and then I will take care of it from there. So if you could just send them to me, that would be great.
Okay, that's fine. Well, that's kind of I guess the action going forward. Relative to the current, the specific situation on the moratorium, do we as a body want to do anything, or do we want to take this as a learning opportunity? Anybody have any thoughts? Okay.
I know that the Planning Commission has it on their agenda to look at the ordinance that the city attorney wrote for us as an alternative to the moratorium. I'm happy to call you directly, Denise, the next time I notice a big error in the bulletin. It just never occurred to me. I ran into Rhonda, and I said, because I talked to her a lot about the mistakes, and usually we don't bother to fix anything, but I said, this is kind of a serious thing because it says that we passed a moratorium and we didn't. And she said, oh, can you just send me a paragraph, Julie, and just tell me a few sentences? And I said, all right, but I'll run it by you from now on. I'm happy to do that. So we're not adding a new lane to Washington Avenue. Maybe Alex can explain that to the public.
Okay, that seems like a constructive move. Perhaps Denise, maybe it would be appropriate to mention this to Alex and see if he wants to if he could talk to the bulletin, and then if they could do something so we have an accurate assessment of the current situation, maybe that would satisfy things. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Alex speaks with them on a regular basis, so I would say, yeah, if you see something, just send it, and then we'll manage it, and we'll send it to the bulletin and manage accordingly, and I'll make sure that we get the Washington Lane managed and get that corrected also.
Okay. Steve, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, last week I received a call from Greg Wellens about trails. Apparently there's quite a bit of money available for trails, particularly the Ring the Peak Trail, and he was proposing making a trailhead for Ring the Peak over by his property over there on the west side, the Adventures Out West. And he intimated that he's going to go ahead and apply for a grant, and I just thought it would be good for OSAC as well as our staff to be aware, of this pot of money he says is available, and people apparently aren't aggressively applying for it. So he seems to feel there's quite an opportunity out there. He was proposing making a trailhead for the Ring the Peak Trail over by his Adventures Out West, and then connecting over to the Ute Trail from there. And I said, that sounds good to me, and possibly connect over to that Midland Railroad grade, in the Jenkins property. And then he started talking about the road that they want to build over to the Cog Railway, and I said, well, I don't think that the neighborhood that lives up there would be in favor of that. In fact, I think to a person, probably they would rise up against a road going over the cog. But anyway, that was our discussion on that. And also this week I met Monday with Kurt Schroeder and Scott Rappold and Skylar Beck at the Bar Trail parking lot, 7 o'clock in the morning. It was a pretty cold morning. We were going to hike the Bar Trail, and we were going to talk about some of the problems I've talked about on the first 2 miles of the Bar Trail. Skylar Beck is taking good initiative on that, and he's talked to Tapas and Associates about, them proposing, looking at it and finding out what the problems are, working with Renfee, and he's found a line item, I guess, in the budget to go ahead and ask Tapas to go ahead. I think it was $19,000 that they'd estimated. To go ahead and do a study of the Bar Trail to find out what the problems are. No. This is Skylar Beck, who's our parks director.
Oh, he's our new guy.
Right,
And there's 19,000 in our budget.
right.
Steve, is the first 2 miles on Manitou city limits, within Manitou city limits?
The first 2 miles of the Bar Trail is mostly owned by Colorado Springs now, after the Strawberry Fields land swap.
But we're using our money to fix it.
We're not fixing anything. We're doing a study to find out what the problems are. It's okay.
Okay, well, I think that's probably a useful update. Maybe if you could, if there's any follow-on stuff, Steve, maybe you could get that to us. Okay?
Okay.
All right, great.
Well, I mean, Skylar Beck can get it to you.
Yeah, well, but, yeah, good point. So there's a,
I mean, I'm just relaying what happened in our meeting.
right. Okay, good, thank you. Anybody else? Judith?
Just to comment on the grant that's being written, as liaison to OSAC, council liaison to OSAC, I just recommend that anybody who's out there wanting to write a grant work with OSAC with regards to any trailheads and trail connectivity. I think that's the appropriate approach I would take to that. I have a question about the planning director position. So I don't feel like the council needs a lot of information on why our interim planning director is with us no longer, but I would like enough information on what happened to determine, there seems to be a problem, and I don't know whether it's a departmental problem, if it's a personnel issue, but, we've had a revolving door of planning directors, and I just think that if there's an issue that council needs to be aware of, I would just like to know at least enough to feel comfortable that, it's not something that we need to look into any deeper. So I don't know if you want to, address that, or if it's a confidential matter, I don't mind, but I'm just, I have, I'm a little concerned about that particular position, so.
I think as a personnel matter, probably is confidential, but that's why we have Mr. Parker here. Jeff?
Yeah, it was a personnel matter, and so it's really difficult to discuss it in a public session. It wasn't like a departmental issue. So, yeah, and that's what I can say, right, in the open meeting.
Don't want any discussion in an open meeting. I would just, if there's anything in confidence that the council could know about, what the particulars of, we just hired this person, and now we have the position open again. It could cause us some concern for me.
All right, thank you. Anybody else have anything? Julie?
I was told that somebody applied for the sent in an email asking to apply to be an alternate on one of our commissions, and she didn't hear back from anybody, and she was wondering what's going on with that and when and why. It was Connie Brochtenbach, and she said that she applied to be an alternate on the Planning Commission, and she texted me earlier and said, have I heard anything about it? Because no one got back to her. And I said, well, maybe they decided they didn't want you because we have all these other alternates being approved tonight, so I don't know. I don't even know if she sent an email to the right place. You know, I didn't see it myself, but I thought I would share that so that someone could at least get back to her. And, because, you know, it's so hard to get people to apply for some of these positions, especially, that's a tough one on Planning Commission, and to be ignored, I'd like someone to contact her.
Okay, thank you. Denise, can you direct that appropriately? Thank you. Okay, anything else for council? If not, let's go ahead with the city administrator's reports. Roy?
Yeah, just an update on maps. Monday, UCSU is going to start potholing and doing locates, and we are hoping within 3 weeks, Wildcat will start construction. It depends on weather, of course, and the plan right now in the winter months to have it done early next year, so hopefully no later than February or March. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Denise?
Yeah, a couple of quick things is today, based on the conversation, I have preliminary for, let me put the exact date so you have it. Sorry, I just pulled it up. May 10th for the work session for us to discuss the midpoint for salary. And I have that on a preliminary for the work session. I just wanted to mention that. Couple other things, we will follow up with the resident that came today at very first, so we'll follow up on those things. We'll follow up on Washington Street. Greg Wellens, Mr. Bremner did send us that. I forwarded that immediately to Dylan and to Skylar so that they are following up to see what grants are available and also the trails and stuff. So I wanted to let you know we did that. I will follow up to see where Connie's email went. I'll probably call her and ask where it's at and then what we need to do to get her involved. And then the $19,000 study for the bar trail, I'll follow up and see where that is and if Corral Springs is matching that. I don't know that, so I will follow up on that and get that to everybody also, which Steve Bremner talked about. So I'll do those things. I will also be following up with an email regarding our conversation last week and what the expectations. I wrote a lot of notes, and I just want to make sure I have a clear direction of what you want for the after-hours service and the data that you're wanting. So we're doing some things right now. We're putting everybody's on the front page of the website. You can look at a city directory now, which has everything real quick, and you can grab numbers. So we're correcting that, and we're doing some other things, but I will be putting that in an email to make sure I know the direction you want. I wrote a lot of notes. Roy took some notes, and I just need to make sure that we have the exact direction that you want us to go. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Denise. Oh, okay, follow on from the Mayor Pro
Could
Tem.
I just ask that you also send the information that on the bar trail and all these grants and Mr. Wellens to Nancy Wilson and the chair of OSAC as well?
Okay, great. Oh, you okay, Julie?
I'm not sure, I asked the police today and they didn't know either. This is the third time that I've called that number for city services, and then you get through that lovely, menu of a million things, and then at the end, you have a voice that says, leave your message, for anything else. So anyway, this is the third time I've stopped here and to go into the police station to tell them that I'm not happy about seeing all these electric scooters on the sidewalk, or especially, I see them, the last 3 complaints I've made is when they were on the sidewalk over the bridge at Columbia and Manitou Ave. Is that Adams Bridge? I don't know what it's called. The new bridge. And so then if you're in a wheelchair, you can't move. You're stuck. You got to go in reverse all the way back to the curb and navigate on the road in the little bike lane. So I don't know. what I was told today by the officer is he said, well, that's really not Manitou. And I said, oh, okay, well, do you want me to call Colorado Springs and complain to them about it? I'm not sure who I'm supposed to call when this happens. You know, one time I got so frustrated, I called 911, which I know wasn't appropriate. But who am I supposed to call, and what phone number am I supposed to use? And are the police, and I mean, the guy was very nice, and he said, I'll go move it if you want. And I said, well, sure, if you have time, you know, that'd be nice, because what are we supposed to do when that happens? Any suggestions? That's Colorado Springs,
Yeah, the scooters.
but
my
it prevents
unders-
people from coming into Manitou, you know. It's right, a few yards away from Manitou.
They are limited, so they technically can't get into Manitou. They shut off, so they could push them into Manitou, but they can't push them onto Manitou, they can't ride them onto Manitou streets.
I don't know who
They're
they is. Who can't
Anyone-
ride?
The scooters are geofenced, which means you can go to the city limit of Colorado Springs, and unless you just, you know, so the E part of it, the electric part of it shuts off. at
Oh,
that
so
point.
that's why they pile up there on that bridge. Well, anyway, the man was very nice, the officer, and I said, well, yeah, if you're willing to do it, that'd be great. If you don't want to do it, I'll call somebody else. Who do you think I should call? And he said, oh, I'll just do it. So any suggestions?
Julie,
Because I think it's going to keep happening with those things.
Yeah, I'm meeting with Chief Otto tomorrow morning. Let me talk to him, and I'll get back with you on that. So let me talk to him and get his perspective and how to manage it, and then I'll get back to all of council.
And I would just say that it's a licensing issue with Colorado Springs. They need to address it with their licensees. I think they've got 2 licenses for scooters, for Lime and Venmo or something like that, Vibo or something.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess that concludes the city administrator's report. So the next item of business is, calls for an executive session. I'll go ahead and read the title, and then I'll seek a motion to go into executive session. An executive session to discuss a personnel matter regarding an employee pursuant to 5.1A of the Manitou Springs Municipal Charter. The executive session concerns the annual performance review of the city administrator. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Councilor Chandler. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Councilor Johnson. Great, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and we'll make the transition over to an executive session. Miss-
Mayor, are you going to motion?
Excuse me?
I mean a vote,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's getting late.
God, I'm sorry, I didn't sleep well last night. I guess it's catching up with me. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, great. Thank God we didn't do the parking presentation tonight. Okay, great. Okay, so we can go ahead and think of basically we'll just have council remain.